Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Results UK's conference. I know people are still filtering it in, but I'll kind of just start by kind of introducing this session. So firstly, welcome to the Results UK's national conference called Take a Stance and Find Chances for Change. Many of you will know Results UK well, others won't. Some of you will be seasoned advocates, whereas others of you might be taking your first steps into advocacy or campaigning. Some of you may have been to past Results UK conferences. For others, this may be your first time, but whoever you are and wherever you are, a very warm welcome to this session. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Alan. I'm the head of policy advocacy at Results UK, and I'll be hosting this session. For those of you new to Results, we're an advocacy organisation with a clear vision to end global poverty, and we do this through a combination of policy, parliamentary, and grassroots advocacy and campaigning. In this session, we're very pleased to hear from our keynote speaker, Gina Miller, and later in the session, we'll have a chance for some questions and a discussion afterwards. Just a few things before we get started. For our Q&A session later, questions can be entered in the chat box at the bottom of your screens, and we'll try and get to as many of these as possible a bit later. Closed captions should be turned on, so just click on the live transcript icon at the bottom to access these, and also for your information, the session will be recorded. Also, inevitably during a virtual conference and sessions, there are possibility of running into technological problems, whether that's connection or other. So if that happens, just bear with us. So now we've covered a bit of virtual housekeeping. I'm very pleased to welcome Gina Miller to our conference and this session in particular. Gina Miller is a successful businesswoman and a respected activist and campaigner. And while Gina has become very well known for her legal challenges to preserve Parliament's sovereignty, her campaign and activism spans over 30 years and has led to change on a range of topics and issues. So amongst others, this has included a drive for transparency, scrutiny and integrity in public and in corporate life, with themes about reform, fairness and social justice. Gina's work's been recognised through several awards that she's been awarded. Amongst others, these include Political Campaigner of the Year and Most Influential Black Person in the 2017 Power List. Gina's still a very active campaigner and continues to inspire activists every day, which is why we're delighted to hear her speak on the challenges and changes to campaigning in the UK and why it's important to keep going, a very relevant topic at Results. So thank you for joining us, Gina. We're very happy to have you here and welcome. And on that note, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And it's my absolute pleasure to be with everyone this morning. And I thank the organisers, everyone involved with the Results event for inviting me. And I think your theme of taking a stance and finding chances for change is extremely apt and timely. And I'm sure your impressive lineup of speakers will help all the attendees in their own journeys on advocacy. I think we'll all agree that the last 18 months has seen the world completely change in terms of issues that perhaps will forever reframe and reshape our lives, freedoms and opportunities, as well as finances in the futures. And this in turn is going to change the issues that need to be campaigned on, because as issues change, we are confronted with many more rights and wrongs, if you like. On a people-centric level, the pandemic has really changed focus and made people think about their local community, frontline workers, supermarket employees, work-life balance, realigning their perceptions, their priorities, and actually what they hold dear in terms of principles and values. It has really shaken certainty, I think, and complacency. Indifference, I think, is now a thing of the past. We hope that will now be very much front and center when we go forward into whatever the new norm becomes. It has shone light on matters that I don't think are necessarily new, but that we sort of kicked down the road and thought too difficult to handle right now. And now we're realizing that they're too difficult to ignore right now. And this new realization and urgency, if you like, means that we have to make decisions as campaigners, as change makers, about how we tackle inequality, intolerance, and rising ideological fervor, which is apparent around the globe. The realization that there are serious consequences for not fixing roofs when the sun was shining. In the UK, I'm actually a bit more hopeful than many commentators, compared to many commentators, because there are issues that I've been sort of trying to bang the drum on for many years that others thought were basically too obtuse. Fundamental flaws, for example, in our machinery of government, in our representative democracy, institutional infrastructure, and lack of checks and balances in our policy-making protocols and procedures. There is a new seriousness, I think, on issues such as environment, education, care for the elderly, the disabled, the disadvantaged, housing, the economy, and as we remember 9/11 today from 20 years ago, on defense and security around the world, just to name but a few. That all is not well in the UK with our mother of all parliaments, that it's weighed down with ancient rituals and protocols and lacks any sort of legislative scrutiny and checks and balances. This naivety that my word is my bond, that those we elect will act with honor and integrity is enough. What we are realizing that is naive in our wish for a modern, effective, transparent, accountable, fair representative democracy, where people come and should come before power. I've been asking to talk a little about my past and where I think we are in the UK and the challenges ahead. So as Alan mentioned, I've been a campaigner for 33 years now. I mean, I actually think I've always been one. I was fortunate enough to grow up at the knees of my father, who was an activist, campaigner, political campaigner at a very difficult time in the country of my birth in British Guiana. And he was the one who first talked to me about the fact that law and justice and injustice is things that happen to people's lives. It's not in a book. It's not in legislation. It is about people. It is about their pain. And it's about making their hurt less. That is actually what we try to do every day if we are good campaigners. It's trying to make people's lives less harmful, less hurtful, and actually right wrongs. But I'm also quite interested, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to history and the etymology of words. I mean, the word campaigner I've always find quite interesting. And I think if you start looking at words, you realize that quite a lot of what we do, campaigning, we talk about think tanks, we talk about strategy, we talk about opponents. Much of it actually came from the battlefields. And it actually informs what we do every day, because we are actually fighting. In a modern term, these are modern battles that we're doing as campaigners. And, you know, there is a book from the 17th century by a writer called Giovanni Pablo Marano, I know, a great name, where he said that campaigning for him was on the fronts of good and evil, battling on the fronts of good and evil. And I think that's a profound and excellent slogan for all of us, even today. But the etymology of the word is actually from the Latin level ground. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to level the ground. We're open fielding. We're trying to make the world level for those so that we walk alongside each other rather than in front and behind each other. So I think that etymology is actually very important to remember, because we can get lost in complicated explanations sometimes. And I like to keep things very simple and focused. And I think that it's important to remember, especially in the days when we want to give up, why we're doing what we're doing. It is to that fighting on the frontiers of good and evil and leveling the ground. My campaigning, as I said, started really, I suppose, when the lioness in me was awoken 33 years ago, when my beautiful baby girl was born with special needs. And I was told that I was a anxious mother. And then eventually, when they realized that she really did have complicated special needs, the idea then that she should be taken away and put into a home was unfathomable and heartbreaking for me. And so I started campaigning because in those days, we didn't have the sort of special needs, the SEND support that you have today. So my first campaigning was to get her support. And I worked for many years for texts that then ended up in the 1996 the Special Education Act. So that was my first sort of real campaigning. And since then, my campaigning has been, as I wake up and I walk through my own life, what are the things that I confront? I don't necessarily actively go out there and look for campaigning effects, because I think if you come across things that affect you, your life, and your loved ones, then you're driven by a different sort of passion. And for me, that has taken me to places where I have fought for reforms in foreign aid, for special needs education, modern day slavery. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, where 16 years ago, there was very little acknowledgement that it even existed for women who were not stupid or weak, that this myth that it only happened to those sorts of women. So there was very little support. So I've been fighting as a voice to try and talk about the damaging effect of domestic violence, coercive behavior on women, families, and children who are often ignored in those situations. Political accountability, and more recently on the online harms bill, which I think is a vastly missed opportunity. And as we talk about Black Lives Matter and slavery, for me, being the child of indentured laborers, the fact that that is an area that we vastly ignore, which was just really another form of slavery. So these are the things that I'm doing and brings me up to date sort of today. But let's talk about the UK. Let's talk about where we are now. We're told that in the midst of chaos, Sun Tzu said, in the midst of chaos, there's always opportunity. But we must be awake to the reality that in the battle to own that opportunity, there'll be people that we fervently disagree with that are also fighting for that new space, that new thinking, the new norms, ideas and ideologies that we may find abhorrent. So we must be ruthless because they're ruthless. We cannot be naive. They are cunning, willing to sacrifice morality, humanity, compassion, rights and freedoms to change the world into the way they believe it should operate. And I think sometimes when I look back from especially the 1980s to now, I think some of us, especially some people in positions of power and responsibility, be it in the corporate, charity or political world, have been a little bit naive about how ruthless the other side have been. And I think we can't afford to be naive as we move forward. In my experience, campaigning is hard work. It takes real energy and resilience and determination, and yes, a thick skin, especially now in the age of social media, and sacrifice, actually. It does take personal and family and professional sacrifice to speak up. But I've always felt that whatever the obstacles, the rewards, the battle to right wrongs is always worth it, whatever the outcome. We might be one voice, or we might think sometimes, how much can we do? But throughout history, people have proven that using that voice, campaigning for all sorts of issues, big and small, can change norms. Change is possible. The world can progress, evolve, and improve. And if you remember, Mother Teresa said, we know only too well that once that we are doing, what we are doing might be a small drop in the ocean. But if that drop were not there, the ocean would be lesser. Over the last 12 to 18 months, we're told that we are facing something that's unprecedented. But throughout history, there have been crises. There have been wars, health crises, financial crises, environmental crises. Civilizations have collapsed. Things have changed, be it in countries or continents. What is different, I think, this time is unprecedented, is that what we're seeing with COVID and this crisis has actually affected every country and every continent. That is new. We have not seen that before. And at this time, we've also seen, against this backdrop of this crisis in the preceding years, an extremely worrying rise of totalitarian and autocratic governments across the globe. For these sorts of leaders, COVID has actually been a bonanza a chance to grab even more power. As leaders around the world, they've passed emergency decrees, legislation, expanding their reach. And as the crisis subsides, I think we as campaigners have to ensure that those powers are relinquished, that these powers and power grabbing does not become the accepted norm and permanently sweep away the changes and progress that other campaigners and change makers took decades, sometimes hundreds of years to achieve. For example, in Britain, the COVID Act of 2020, which received royal assent in March of 2020, was fast-tracked in just 4 days. It's astonishing if you think back. And it gave the government eye-watering powers to detain people, close borders, prevent mass gatherings, close economies, schools. Almost every part of our lives have been affected by that act. Luckily, there's a sunset clause in there. But on the other hand, it's just been a rubber stamp because every 6 months, it has just been passed through due to the government's majority. The good news is that it will automatically deteriorate and end in 2 years' time from passing of the act. So that's March 2022. But again, look at what's happening under cover of COVID. Even though that act may go, there are other things that we must be extremely worried about that are coming onto the statute book and are likely to be passed this autumn. And it is a raft that is eye-watering, I have to say. It's something I never thought any government would have the audacity to push through. But if we could just touch on a few now, and I'm sure we'll come to them in the Q&A session. The Judicial Review and Courts Bill, which will reform every part of our court system and actually will take away the rights to challenge government in a significant way, but not only to challenge government, because if we think the judicial review was, for example, used in the Hillsborough inquiry, it was used for bullying in the armed forces. It's been used in matters of housing. It has not just been a tool on the political landscape. It has been a place for people to get their rights heard and for justice for other parts of their lives. That is going to be seriously curtailed. There's also, we're told, a review of the Independent Human Rights Act, which will potentially change many parts of the way our rights work in the UK. And also a review of the role of the Lord Chancellor and his relationship or her relationship with the judiciary and the Supreme Court. One has to ask, is this really reform or revenge? I know which side I'm coming down on that. Then there's a controversial policing, crimes and sentencing bill, which, as I say, I'm sure we will get questions on, which is astonishing. The counter state threat bill, which will effectively make journalists spies if they write stories with unauthorized information. Just think about that. Journalists will be treated like spies with the possibility of them being sentenced to up to 14 years for using unnamed sources. Think about the MP's expenses case. Think about Lissange. There's so many things where journalists have been actually highlighting things that we, the public, would not have known about. That is actually, at the end of the day, the role of the media and journalism. Is it to inform us of what is happening in the corridors of power and money? And it is extraordinary that this act will make them, that will not be able to exercise the public interest clause or defense. The Dissolution of Calling of Parliament Act, which will repeal the Fixed Term Act. And of course, the Electoral Integrity Bill, which is a huge, blatant and dangerous assault on our democracy, in my view. But outside the UK, in Hungary, the Prime Minister is ruling by decree. In Chile, we've seen the military sent into squares occupied by protesters. We've seen what's happened in Myanmar, what's happening in Hong Kong. In Bolivia, they've postponed elections. Under the cover of COVID, leaders across the globe have invoked executive powers and see virtually dictatorial authority with scant resistance. These extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures and actions by campaigners and change makers. But what is happening means that those who are campaigning, I think, are likely to face an increased level of threats, bullying and intimidation, perhaps even violence. Actually, I'm sure in some parts of the world, yes, violence. Look at what we've seen just this week in Afghanistan. But we need to be strong. We really do need to have courage, compassion, and collaborate. Align our values and be strong in our focus to fight for people above power. Our new norm must oust complacency, consumerism, and naked capitalism. Our new norm must be about sustainability, safety, equality, fairness, and yes, happiness for each other. Each of us has a part to play. And I hope the conferences like today's will really inspire people to be energized about collective responsibility and the need that as we recover from COVID, we need to lay new ground rules, new groundwork for not just recovering from COVID, but the destructive headwinds coming our way, be it on climate change, on increasing insecurity around the globe, about economic recovery and capitalist, what I call capitalist surveillance, as more and more people with power actually treat us as a commodity, as individuals as a commodity, and the positive and negative effects of digital and the technological revolution. Because these will have huge impacts on our democracy, our freedom of speech, and our privacy. This is a huge time of change. And we, I think, as the army of campaigners and change makers, need to be at the forefront of what happens next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gina, for those very rich reflections. Also, kind of, sometimes it's, when you hear from people, kind of, there's danger of it being overly theoretical. So kind of really appreciated as you went through the genesis of your campaigning journey, how you brought your own experiences to life, whether that was kind of the needs of your daughter or domestic violence and other things. So yeah, thanks for sharing on that level as well. So just to let the audience know, if you have questions, please write them in the chat box.
Please.
I think the mutes, you're all muted, so I think if you can write them in the chat box, that's the best way, and then we'll come to some of those now. I'm going to jump to the top of the list though, and just kick off with maybe one of my own, if that's all right. Gina, so you've obviously got a rich history of campaigning, and from where I'm sitting, you've achieved a lot and enacted a lot of change, right? But let's be honest, like, campaigning is challenging, right? At best, perhaps sometimes it's very bruising, right? Like, why are you waking up on a Saturday to kind of come and share with us? By that I mean, like, you've done more than enough, like, going away into the sun. What keeps you going is my question. What makes you keep coming back and kind of dispense of that same energy to campaigning?
I tell you, it's exhausting. You're right. And some days I do feel like giving up, especially, the sort of 4 years ago when the threats were intense. And basically, I'm a busybody. No, I mean, that's what my family say. But no, I don't know where it came from, nature or nurture, but I do have this intense passion when I see things that are wrong. I hate bullies. I hate liars. I just intently despise people who think they have a right to make other people's lives worse, and actually self-interest. So I do have a very strong sense of injustice. And I don't, as I say, if that's nature or nurture, it's probably a bit of both. But I think over the years, I've done a lot of work on myself. And that sounds an odd thing to say, maybe, but I made a decision that especially when I went through the battle of my daughter and then surviving domestic violence, I almost thought, well, what else can people do for me? And I discovered I was much stronger than I thought I was. And I spent years reflecting about how I could use that strength. And sometimes it's not always. I mean, a lot of my campaigning is not necessarily in the public eye, and I don't tend to lead it because I look at things and I analyze where can my input be best helped. I mean, sometimes there are other people doing a much better job where all I need to do is maybe make some suggestions, connect people, and that's the best I can do in that particular campaign. Other ones I might think about, have they thought about a strategy that's missing? So I may write a strategy document. Others I may front it. My campaigning doesn't always, it's not always the same. It's where I think I will be best and where I'm best needed. You have to be humble in your campaigning. It's not actually about you at all. It is about what you want to achieve. And that sometimes means that the frustrating bit, I have to admit, Alan, also is that when you've been fighting for something for a long time, I'll give you an example in the online safety bill at the moment. Since I experienced the horrendous abuse online, and I realized what women who stand up in public life or people from ethnic minorities sort of experience, I started in 2016 talking, not just in the UK, but globally, to politicians about the need for regulation in a field of social media platforms who are making billions with impunity. And yet we live our lives increasingly online, yet there's no regulation online. I was being pushed back. And then in the last 18 months or so, you get a celebrity or a footballer, whoever it is, step up. And I'm thinking, hang on, I've actually written you legislation. I've worked with other people with you. We've worked collaboratively with so many organizations pushing this. And then I have to think, well, actually, it's about the outcome. So you have to temper your own feelings sometimes and go back to focusing on what you're trying to achieve. It is a price. And the thing is, I'm very honest, if you have a family, you have to talk to your family because there is a price to pay for them as well. I never imagined that taking my stance to defend democracy, our parliamentary sovereignty, which was the thing I thought we were all fighting about, that would result in my children being, threats to take them. Basically, we started living under security and we were almost in lockdown. We never went anywhere for about 4 years, without security and without significant changes to our lives. I never envisaged that. So I've learned that I need to take my family and my children with me on journeys because it has an impact on them. And I've always tried, when I became a mother, I didn't want my successes, be it in business or campaigning, to be at the cost of their sorrow, if you like, or their unhappiness. So I've always tried to explain to them what I'm doing. And if I need to take time out to look after me, to have a good cry, to recharge myself, then I'll step out. And what's extraordinary is that then you'll get over social media, oh, Gina Miller has stated she's not doing anything for us, and you just have to ignore people. And I've developed a very thick skin, but at the same time, I've tried not to become hard, because I think this whole idea of becoming tough means that I would not be myself. And also I would not let other people's pain in if I just put up this tough, hard exterior. And I try not to be rigid. I try to stay emotional, soft, human, because I think without empathy, without the ability to connect with others, you actually can't be a good campaigner. I think you have to stay soft. So there are things, it's a long answer to what you're saying, but I think what I'm trying to say is it is hard, it's tough, but remember why you're doing what you're doing.
I love that, Gina. I love that kind of challenge right at the end, to kind of the temptation to kind of not become like the person you're campaigning against, to kind of remind yourself why you stay separate and kind of go through that pattern of emotions of why you started that, and not to become hardened by that. So yeah, really good challenge for us. So my eyes would be darting a bit as I look through the questions that are being asked, but we've got one here from Push. Push is from India. He was one of our results as grassroots campaigners working in Africa on global health. So Push is asking us, you talked to us about the UK domestic issues, and he thinks you painted it so well, and wondered that despite us working in tech development, whether we need to start working on UK issues. But I guess his overall question is, what issue, quite a big open question, do you think results should be taking on, given our work?
I think at the moment, it's because we're still in the midst of the pandemic, it's not over, and we actually are facing uncertainty. It has to be about vaccine equality. It has to be. it is quite extraordinary what is going on around the world. And the fact it's not in the headlines does not mean it's gone away. We are neglecting millions and billions of people around the globe. We have to have vaccine equality. That is something that I think we have to fight for now. But going forwards, there are so many issues. I think I've been thinking about this really hard, Christian. I've been thinking there are so many issues that need to be addressed as we go forwards. Where can we drop a few stones, if you like, where the ripple effects will be that we'll create change in some of the other areas? And I think it is about power. I do think it is about democracy, because unless we have democracy across the globe and we stop this rise of autocracy, then I don't think our voices can create change. I think we will go back almost hundreds of years to almost a feudal system, especially in a world where we have tech giants, if you like, who are monetizing their power through politicians and backing them. We will end up with a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots if we allow this to happen. So I think my answer to that is once a vaccine, once we get over COVID, it's about getting back to increasing the democracy club, if you like, and ensuring that our voices are not silenced around the globe.
Thank you. Thank you, Gina. Yeah, so someone's just put in the text box, remember why you're doing and what you're doing, and the fact that a challenge reminder to keep that in the back of their head when they're campaigning. So thank you for that. Really glad that part of your answer was also about vaccine equity, something we are working on, and actually will be part of our next session. So for those audience members that are here, do join the next session for that. We've got a question here. You talked a little about campaigns on social media and kind of builds around that. So Della had a question here. How do you pick your battles, Gina, on social media?
I don't pick I think all my battles, I said, all my campaigning comes from my everyday life and where I experience things. So, another one of my campaigns has been when the financial crisis, because that's my sort of day job, if you like, is heading up an investment company. When the financial crisis happened, I just had this feeling that nothing was really going to change. We just get lots of glossy brochures promising all sorts of things. But behind the rhetoric, the reality is that it would be business as usual. So, I've been trying to fight for transparency and fairness in financial services. And someone said to me, Gina, you're going to take on the city, the entire institution, you by yourself. And I said, yes, because I've got a superpower, which is called honesty and intellectual honesty. And the minute, and this is one of the tips I'll give some of the other people in this, that when I start campaigning, if I launch a new issue or whatever it is, and people attack me personally, I actually sit back, because I think if you actually could attack what I'm saying and my arguments, you would do. But the fact you're actually attacking me personally means you actually can't attack what I'm saying. You're being intellectually dishonest if you do. So I've already won half the battle. So it gives me a sort of strange confidence if they attack me personally. And that's sort of the way I've sort of articulated it in my mind. And I sort of do these little tricks, if you like, to keep myself safe. And that's one of them. But on the online, it's easy to jump on campaigns where it's a plaster over. And I try really hard not to do that. I try, for example, on online, it would have been great to just say it was all about, shutting down people who are extreme, but actually it's not. It's much more complicated than that. It's so much more about, modern day slavery is happening online. Crime has basically moved online. And so we have to have a medium that's regulated. So I try to look at things. How can I come up with longer term solutions? Because it's all very well identifying a problem. That's actually in a way the easy bit. We know, most of us know what the problems are. It's moving to the solutions. So my campaigning, I try really hard to look at what are the solutions? What legislation can we write? What policy work can we do? How can we get consumer groups involved? How can we connect charities to work with the government and businesses to work with charities? How can they share their knowledge? So it's more about, I like to campaign. My campaigning, I try to come up with real concrete solutions rather than just writing theoretical papers or documents or doing speeches of things that are theoretical.
Thank you, Gina. I'm getting all the questions sent to me here, and there's quite a lot, and so I might.
I'll start keeping them shorter than the
answer.
answer.
No. That's I was actually going to say the tech team's probably going to kill me for this, but if we can, we might have to go 5 minutes over just to get some of these in, and just for the audience, we'll try and get around to as many as we can, but sorry in advance if we're not able to. There's a question here. Well, maybe I'll combine a couple of what other lengths organizations should be prepared, or campaigns should be prepared to go in campaigning. So, for example, Extinction Rebellion, someone says here, should we be more like them and risk prison? And then another person with that says, how do you also measure success in campaigning, Gina?
So I think we have to be mindful that in the age of social media and very powerful media, I would say campaigning needs to not automatically turn off people. I think it's very important that you have to take people with you, because otherwise you won't create change. And it's about educating and talking. I deliberately, not only do I try and make things very practical, I deliberately the first people I go and see when I think of a campaign is those, I tend to make appointments with those who don't agree with me. And believe me, when they get an email from me, they're so shocked because they think they're the last people that I'll want to see. So I'll deliberately go and see the people who disagree with me first, because I want to talk to them. I want them to understand where I'm coming from, and I want for me to understand them. Because actually, what is the point of talking to people who agree with me? It's a waste of my effort. So I try and, I bring those people who are also on my side. I explain what I'm doing, but I will put more of my energy into meeting and talking to those who disagree with me, because I do think creating change means taking people. If you come up with a campaign and others feel threatened, then you have a harder battle. It is about taking people with you. And so I think that's really important. But the threat, what I'm really concerned about going forwards, especially in the UK, is if you put together the draft of legislation all together and you look at the cumulative effect of it, is that we are basically being silenced in the courts, on the streets, across social media, in the media. It's going to become much more difficult. How can we silent protesting? I mean, it's a complete nonsense. The fact that in the past, in political campaigning, I've done tactical voting, or we've talked about progressive alliances. If you look in the electoral reform bill, those will become illegal. They've got a phrase in there called common purpose, which is so loosely defined. It basically says any organization, charity, individual, campaigning organization, third party, political party, can't work together on common purpose. I mean, it is quite extraordinary. I never thought I'd see that in British legislation. So I think campaigning is going to become more difficult. And I think we will be facing the question of, are we willing to be arrested? Because also the police are going to be given much more discretionary powers, and they decide if what you're doing is illegal. So the increase in police powers, the shutting down of our voices, I mean, we won't be able to, even one of us won't be able to go along Parliament, along the side there anymore, to protest with a banner. That's also going to be made illegal. So we are going to be facing a time, and I've been really thinking about this, about what am I prepared to do? And I have said to my children and my family and my husband that I am prepared to get arrested, because I think that's what it's going to take in the future. If this legislation goes through, which, why wouldn't it? It's, second reading was this week. The Police and Crimes Bill, second reading is next Tuesday. With an 80-seat majority, we have a toothless parliament, and all this legislation will go through. The House of Lords can introduce a few amendments. I don't think the government will take any note of them. So I think we are really going into a time where we may have to risk, I'm not saying being disrupted and on the streets, but by just doing what we've done in the past, we can get arrested.
Thank you, Gina. I'm going to try and do the last 3 questions, and then I think try not to go over the 5 minutes. One question here around being a mother and campaigning, Gina. How are you able to strike a balance between doing that and, some women struggle because of, the responsibilities of caring and campaigning. What advice would you give them, or how have you been able to manage it?
It's a struggle. And I never lose the guilt of thinking I should be, with them rather than, out fighting. That never goes away. But I've always, from when they were very little, I've always talked to them. I've never hidden who I am for my children. They don't have any sort of an airbrush view of who I am. I talk to them about my failures most of the time, about who I was little, why I'm doing what I'm doing, in terms that they can understand. I've always done that with them. So they've, I think, grown up not knowing me as being anybody different. And they understand. I tell them I'm fighting for the world I want them to grow up in. That it's my responsibility as a mother to make the world a place that they will not feel fear because of the color of the skin or what sexuality they feel or what voice they're using. You know, they can be whoever they want to be, and that's the world I'm fighting for them. So that's why I explain it to them. But it also, there's this, I'll say to mothers, there's this idea you have to spend lots of time with your children. I don't fall into that guilt trap. It's about, you know, when I spend time with them, what I'm doing, and they know I'm thinking of them. I do weird things like leave little post-its in their school shoes, just saying I love you, when they know I'm not going to be around. They always know they can find a note from me somewhere bizarre when they're not expecting it. But they know they're loved anyway. You know, I've always, once your children know that they are loved and cared for, you don't physically need to be there for them to know that. If they have that love and they know that, you can do your job and they can be proud of you doing your job, whatever you decide to do. So I've worked at it, but the guilt never goes away.
Thank you, Gina, for those reflections. A couple of people here are saying, how do we unite and connect with others, particularly on social media, when I think the question is people or organizations pit people against each other? So in regards to, for example, asylum seekers, which is perhaps one, but it can be anything.
I think there is something we have to be mindful that some campaigners and organizations can want to take the limelight and can squeeze out others. And that does happen, and it's a reality, and we have to accept that that happens. And I think it's about going, almost you interviewing them, the organizations and the grassroots organization, and seeing where it is you feel more comfortable. And quite often it's not, you have to be a reality about the life you're leading, your professional, your family life. How much time have you got to give? And sometimes it's local is good. So looking about something that's local that you can go in and out and then they can connect with you and you can keep it at your level. So I think, you know, it's almost you have to interview the organizations, not just jump in at the ones that are most in the press or in the headlines. Because actually, when I had my foundation for 10 years, I launched a charitable foundation where I only funded what I call the real heroes, the grassroots organizations, because they don't tend to get the support. And actually, because they are at the coalface and they're dealing directly with those who are suffering from whatever the issue is, they tend to have much more practical insight. And I think they're neglected because of that. So I tend to think that's a really good place to start, especially if you're early in your journey. If you're early in your journey, connect with somebody who is smaller and can mentor you in a way and grow with you, and you can grow with them. So I think that's what I'd say from that point of view. It's really important to match your experience with the organization that you're connecting with.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll probably kind of ask kind of a last question here. So there's a question here from Ross that says, do you think there's an overriding issue that needs to be tackled before others can be tackled? So for example, campaigning for voting system change in order to tackle government corruption and power grabbing and to create a more open and political environment. And then, sorry, Gina, and someone else has just said, how can they help and support you in your campaigning and work? And
well, actually, those two are absolutely perfect together, because watch this space in about a month. I really do believe we have a very strange system in the UK. Remembering we're only one of 3 countries that has a completely unwritten constitution. But we have this idea that what we do is, in our elections, irrespective of who's in power, because I'm not really, I think the old norms of how we classify parties and policies is completely redundant in today's world. But you know, we somehow think that what we're going to do is elect the best captain and crew to sail our ship, and we have never invested in the actual ship and the machinery and the engines of the ship and government. We do things. We have rituals in government that are based on 400 years ago. The protocols in government are based on a book called Erskine May that was written in 1875 by a junior, a junior clerk. I mean, the whole thing, when you dissect it, is absurd in a modern democracy. So the idea that we have no constitutional checks and balances has got to be addressed. I think there is no question now. And I think COVID has done a remarkable job of exposing the corruption. I mean, we thought it was in every other country, or, you know, we were proud to say, oh, we were not like them. Actually, we've turned out to be worse than most of them. You know, the chomography and the corruption and the, you know, the fact that you can go to court. I mean, it's amazing how many people have gone to court. And what do politicians get? They get a slap on the wrist. They're still in post. I mean, you know, we can't waste money on the courts, on you know, campaigning if there is, at the end of the day, no legislative comeback. The idea of them and us is abhorrent and has got to end. And that's where I would leave that at the moment.
Thank you very much, Gina. And I think I was able to get through most of them, but sorry if I haven't been able to. But there will be a forum after this where further discussions can take place. No, thank you so much for joining us today, this morning, Gina. It's been a pleasure hearing from you. And as I said before, for me personally, it was really good just hearing some of your personal kind of reasons for campaigning and what drives you. And, you know, integrity is a word that's spoken a lot about, but seeing someone really live that out as well is really inspiring. And I'm sure you'll get lots of people from the audience who'll be wanting to be in touch and or support your campaign, whichever way they can. So you certainly have my support, and I'll be finding ways of trying to be involved.
You know, honestly, I mean, it will be out there. I mean, we've got to do something, and I don't jump in. I've really spent the last year thinking very, very hard about this and listening and talking to people. Those, as I said, I agree with, I don't agree with, not just in the UK, but around the world. And, you know, I'm informed in where I think we need to go next, and I will be sharing that with everyone.